A round of applause for Bill Limpert.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to thank the Averets for having us here today, and also thank Friends of Nelson, and thank all of you for coming as well. My name is Bill Limpert. My wife Lynn is here. And like Charlie said, we have property in Bath County. We've owned it for about 10 years now. It's our retirement property. We have a home there as well. Unfortunately, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline's proposed to go right through the center of it and take down a lot of old growth and never been cut virgin forest. We feel that we would lose 300 trees that are actually older than our country to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We'd also lose a lot of 200-year-old trees, 100-year-old trees as well. So this is the, actually we're into the 4th year of fighting the pipeline here just about every day. And when we started this fight, I was 39 years old, a couple inches taller than Richard, and had a big thick head of hair as well. But I'm really privileged to work with so many people shoulder to shoulder fighting this gross injustice, I can tell you that. And we're not going to relent. So Lynn and I haven't been over to Nelson County that much, but it's absolutely beautiful, and we're going to keep it that way. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the pipeline coating and its potential impact on public safety and also public health. I've got to say up front, we don't know for sure if the coating is making these pipes unsafe or if the coating itself is unhealthy, but we've got a lot of indications that that may be the case. I should also say that I'm not an expert on any of these issues. I'm kind of learning on the run here, and I thought this was something I should be concentrating on and something we may be able to get some traction on. Actually, I've got a degree in psychology, and I worked in that field for a little bit, but it started driving me crazy. So I've always enjoyed the outdoors, and I thought I'd start working for the environment. So I did work for the Maryland Department of Environment for 28 years and had a couple other jobs prior to that working with the environment in water pollution issues. And just a little sidelight here, one of the things I did was investigate and enforce erosion and sediment control on large construction sites. So I've looked at thousands of erosion and sediment control plans, and I can tell you with no hesitation whatsoever that the plans that have been approved for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and what I also hear about the plans that were approved from the Mountain Valley Pipeline, the worst plans I've ever seen. A giveaway to the ACP and to the MVP. And something that's going to destroy our water quality here, as we're already seeing from the MVP. So, I've learned a little bit of information about the pipeline coating, and what I've learned is very troubling. There's a lot I don't know, and we're still trying to get information on that. And even more troubling is that this information's being hidden from us and from me by the industry and by our government regulatory agencies. So the pipeline coating for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, something called 3M Scotch Coat Fusion Bonded Epoxy 6233. And that's placed on the outside of the pipes at pipeline manufacturer. It's placed there to prevent or reduce the external corrosion on the pipe itself. Without that, the outer part of the pipe would corrode and possibly rust or corrode through, which could create a catastrophic explosion. This material is also used on a lot of other natural gas pipelines, and I should say natural gas pipelines. There's nothing natural about this gas. It's pulled from deep in the bowels of the earth, and it hurts our planet and it hurts ourselves too. I don't see anything natural about this industry. I think it's basically all toxic all the time. something we shouldn't have to put up with. This material, fusion bonded epoxy, has been used for decades. And it's used on other pipelines across the country as well. So what's the risk of pipeline explosion? The pipeline companies like to say it's the safest way to transport natural gas. But to me, that's like saying, well, this is the safest way to eat rat poisoning as well. I don't think there's anything safe about it. Per the environmental impact statement for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline from 1997 to 2016, there have been 1,329 significant incidents in the United States. That comes out to about 66 per year, or more than 1 per week. They also report that 24% of these incidents were from pipeline corrosion. So that's a lot of pipes that have been failing because of corrosion. Some of that corrosion is internal, and this coating wouldn't cover that. Other corrosion is on the exterior part of the pipe. So what's the definition of a significant pipeline incident? It's an incident, and this is per the industry standard, it's an incident that causes death, serious injury, $50,000 or more in 1984 dollars in property damage. That's probably $150,000 now. Or an incident that spills 5 barrels of highly volatile pollutants or 50 barrels of any other liquid. So that's happening more than once a week here in our country. Oh, by the way, a barrel is 42 U.S. gallons. So we're talking about a lot of liquid here. And every couple of months we hear about a big pipeline explosion. So the federal agency that is responsible for pipe safety is the Federal Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, also known as PHMSA. They're responsible for pipe safety. They're part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. The Virginia State Corporation Commission is cooperating with PHMSA in inspections for the ACP and the MVP here in Virginia. So the pipeline itself is approved by another federal agency, as Richard mentioned, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. By the way, they're fully funded by the energy industry. There's a revolving door between the regulatory agency and the industry itself. I've seen nothing but trouble from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Additionally, so the pipeline route is approved by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and PHMSA doesn't have a say in it as far as I know. Additionally, a geohazard assessment, or the assessment of landslide risk or flooding risk to the pipeline, is made by a consultant that is hired by the pipeline company. And so PHMSA is left with what they give them. So I've worked with a number of people in PHMSA, and generally they're good people trying to do a good job. They're grossly understaffed. They're dominated by the industry. The laws and regulations all favor the pipeline companies. I've read through a number of the regulations. They all have an escape clause. For instance, you shouldn't put a pipeline down in a narrow valley because pipe liquids might concentrate in the bottom of the pipe and corrode out the bottom of the pipe, causing a big explosion. So they say you have to avoid those areas except if it's not practicable. So that there's always an escape clause at the end of these, unless it's not necessary. Oh, they've got the PHMSA public participation policy is based on the American Petroleum Institute's. It's identical to the American Petroleum Institute's public participation policy. You have to leave out this much information unless it's not necessary. So it's a pretty weak set of regulations as far as I can tell. I can tell you as well that like I said, I've talked to a number of people at PHMSA, and I'm not going to name names, but one of the people, and it was a real shock to me, told me on the phone, he said, Mr. Limpert, I can tell you that the pipeline companies are running the show here. And I just about fell off my seat. He said, and it's a disgrace to PHMSA, and it's a disgrace to the American people. So I think there's some people at PHMSA as well who realize the sorry state that they've been left in. So, one other little industry mandated thing that PHMSA has to put up with. If there's a gas pipeline explosion or accident, PHMSA has to call it an incident. They can't call it an accident. If there's a hazardous liquid pipeline leak, that's a little different. They can call that an accident. The industry also calls the path of the pipeline with all its destruction a greenway. So they really like to play the words, I can tell you that. So in terms of the safety issues, we're talking about a 42-inch diameter gas pipeline for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and also the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Never been put through terrain like this before, with steep slopes, karst terrain as well. The pipeline would carry 1.5 billion cubic feet of gas per day. I think I figured out it would move at around 12 miles an hour through the pipeline. 1,440 pounds per square inch on that pipe walls, which are about a ½ inch thick. If these pipelines explode, it's going to be a catastrophic explosion. A retired nuclear engineer told me a couple of years ago that if all the gas in the Atlantic Coast Pipeline blew up at once, it would be greater than the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. The pipelines are supposed to be segregated into valves that automatically cut on and close during a pipeline emergency, or if pressure gets really low, and so only part of that gas would explode. Nevertheless, that would be equivalent to our military's biggest conventional bombs. So all these are catastrophic.
Bill?
Yes?
How far apart are those valves?
It varies. I think about 15 or 20 miles is the furthest apart they are. They're all remotely controlled, and whether or not that, the controls would automatically cut on, we hope they would, but we're not sure of that. So, the zone of incineration, or the blast zone around these pipelines, and I'm talking about MVP and ACP, is 2,200 feet wide. Anything would be incinerated instantly in that zone. The evacuation zone, which is a zone that you have to leave within minutes to avoid death or serious injury, is 1.4 miles wide. So I think the total size of the evacuation zone for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is about half the size of the state of Rhode Island. So that's a lot of people in jeopardy, a lot of people living in a dangerous place. So I asked FERC about that early on. I asked their environmental reviewer, Kevin Bowman, how many people are living in the evacuation zone or the blast zone of the pipeline? And he said, we don't know. We don't go into that level of detail. So I about fell off my seat at that one too. Additionally, regardless of any of these other safety issues, these pipelines are totally unsecured. There's not a fence separating the bad guys from the pipeline. I think they're susceptible to sabotage and terrorist incidents. A couple of years ago, I talked to a retired soil conservation man out in Bath County, and I said, a terrorist could come out in one of these rural areas in the middle of the night and dig a hole and put a bomb in that and just blow that thing up. He said they wouldn't need to dig a hole. So it's really frightening. So anyhow, 3M makes the pipeline coating, this fusion bonded epoxy. And they have a document that we would have shown here, but it shows that UV or sunlight degrades their coating. And it causes it to chalk off. What that means is little particles of dust come off of it as the sun shines on it. 3M recommends covering the pipes so that this doesn't happen with tarps, or applying a whitewash to the exposed upper layer of the stockpile as the pipes are stockpiled, or applying an additional coating of polyurethane or polyester. We don't know for sure, but we haven't been told that any of those preventive actions have been taken. Both pipeline companies could have applied this polyurethane additional covering at the factory, but they chose not to do so.
Excuse me, Bill.
Yes.
You talk about the diffusion coating. Is that the process that it's applied?
The fusion bonded epoxy coating, yeah, it's applied at the factory. The pipes are heated to 300 and some degrees, and then the original powdery material is applied to the pipes where it hardens.
It's sprayed, or what's?
Don't know for sure how that's done.
And the polyester coating is what everybody have to give up their leisure suits?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not an expert, but yeah, apparently that could have been added, and it wasn't added. It could probably still be added at this point.
How do we know they didn't do it? I mean,
Don't know.
It seems like they're not telling us much.
I spoke to Durabond, the pipe manufacturer for the ACP. He said, no, we didn't add that additional coating.
Are we confident it's the same for the MVP for the pipe that they've already
No.
stored? Like, we don't
No, I just asked him specifically about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. My phone call to Durabond was pretty eventful. For about the first 5 minutes, I got verbally berated as a tree hugger and you name it. And I decided I'm going to hang in there. And I got a little bit of information. I didn't get very good information. The information I got was really vague. But anyhow, the coating degrades under sunlight like today. So all the pipes that are sitting out somewhere right now with the sun shining on them are, the coating is degrading. So how bad is it? The National Association of Pipeline Coating Manufacturers, one of their bulletins says they advise that storage in the sun for no more than 6 months. Several experts that I've talked to have said that, well, the coating's probably safe for about 2 years. In sunlight. Anything beyond 2 years, and we don't know. Dominion admits that the pipes have been stored in the sun now longer than the Durabond manufacturer's recommendations, but Dominion won't tell me how long that recommendation is. Durabond won't tell me how long that recommendation is. And apparently Durabond had that recommendation on their website, and now it's been removed. And I wonder why. Durabond also says that Dominion is their biggest customer and they don't want to make any waves. So we know that the pipes for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline have been stored in the sun for at least 3 years at this point. And they're probably going to be stored in the sunlight for a longer period of time since the project's now on hold. I should explain that in these pipe storage yards, you generally have, these storage yards are huge. There's 80,000 pipes that would go into the ACP. And images of these storage yards, you see pipes for as far as the eye can see. I mean, going over the horizon, it looks like to me. But they're generally stacked 4 high. And the only ones that would be subject to the sunlight degradation are the pipes on the top or maybe the pipes on the very side. But still, if we're talking a quarter of the pipes, that's 20,000 pipes that could be damaged here. They've already been in the sun for 3 years. We're going on to the 4th year here real soon, and who knows how long they will be out there. A 3M document indicates a loss of 3/8 to 1.5 millimeters of coating per year. A study of pipe storage, and this is a 20-year-old study now, in southern Canada and northern United States found 3/4 of a millimeter loss per year. Experts that I've talked to have said probably losing 1 to 2 millimeters per year. And that rate of loss is higher in hotter and more humid climates. So it never gets hot or humid here in Virginia, so I don't think we have to worry about that. So another thing I don't know is how thick the coating was applied. Durabond wouldn't tell me. Durabond said, oh, it's probably 14 to 18 millimeters.
How then does the 3/8 number that you said figure? I was wondering about the overall thickness based on, you said, the degradation.
That's the loss rate.
The loss
A
rate.
loss rate of 3/8 to 1.5 millimeters per
How
year.
could it lose 3/8 if it's only
Millimeter.
maximum less than that?
3/8 of 1 millimeter.
3/8 of 1 millimeter.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, okay. So Durabond couldn't really tell me for sure how thick the coating was placed on there. They said, oh, it's probably 14 to 18 millimeters. So I'm figuring if the experts are saying if it's losing as much as 2 millimeters per year, it may have already lost 6 millimeters of coating. So we could be down as low as 8 millimeters of coating remaining on those pipes that are exposed to the sun. And a year from now, we may be down to 6 millimeters of coating. And so I'm wondering, well, what's the safe level? Well, the American Society for Metals says that the minimum coating for fusion bonded epoxy is 12 millimeters. So it's possible we're already below that level. We just don't know. PHMSA won't tell me. PHMSA tells me that we've looked at the pipes, and now Dominion is looking at the pipes every half year, and everything's okay. And I'm, yeah, yes.
Can you get that information through a FOIA request?
You may be able to get it through a FOIA request, and I made a FOIA request about 6 months ago, and they told me it would be 485 days before I would get a response. And I argued that I've got some different requests here. They're not all the same. Give me the easy information first. They said, no, they're all lumped into one. It'll be 485 days, Mr. Limpert.
Talk about snail mail.
Beyond that, PHMSA says that no inspection information whatsoever will be made available to the public until the project's completed. Say, I had requested like a real-time inspection portal where we could see, well, we inspected the pipes this day and they're okay, and here's how thick the coating is, and here's what they're covered with. And we did a hydrostatic test today and it showed that the pipes aren't leaking. And we did some backfilling today and or last week, and the correct material was being placed on top of the pipes in the pile. And the welding inspections are all okay because welder X here did 20 welds today and they all panned out right. We're not going to get any of that, according to PHMSA, until the project's completed. And by then the pipes will all be in the ground. Maybe the gas will be running through them. And I think it'll be too late to do anything about it at that point. So I'm upset about that. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it.
Bill, question.
Yes.
If Dominion had to replace, what is it, 20,000 a quarter of those pipes, what kind of cost are we talking about?
Big cost.
Cha-ching.
Big cost. I've heard that the contract for the pipes was $400 million. So 25% of that would be $100 million. I've also heard that besides the coating being an issue, if pipes are stacked for a long period of time, the lower pipes tend to go out around. And I haven't heard this from experts, I'm hearing it from others. And if you have out around pipes, it's really difficult to get a good weld. And that's another safety issue as well.
The length of the pipes typically?
The length?
Yeah.
Each pipe's about 40 feet in length. So that's a lot of pipe, and it's a huge cost as well. So
Along the cost issue, if they were to have done the polyurethane coating as Durabond recommended, do you have any idea how much that would have increased?
no, Durabond did not recommend the polyethylene
They didn't?
coating.
Okay.
No, they didn't. As a matter of fact, they said, oh, we haven't done that on pipes for a long time. So maybe the industry is not using that polyethylene coating to prevent the UV degradation. Don't know for sure.
They haven't had to, they just put the fixes aren't doing anything.
Yeah. I can also tell you that the MVP testified in court that when they were on a stop work order, we need to get these pipes in the ground because the sunlight is degrading their protective coating.
Bill, I think you have a...
Yes. Hi, Madeline.
Along the lines of the welding, we have a person who was here in Nelson County who retired after 38 years as a foreman on pipeline jobs. He said welds always leak, and the industry itself says they can guarantee 2% leakage of methane. And originally, back 4+ years ago, they told me 7%. They said, oh, well, we don't want to lose that, so we got to do something to reclaim it. But the fact is...
Yeah, PHMSA also told me that the hydrostatic tests always show that there is some leakage as well. And they indicated to me, we don't want the public to get worried about that because the public doesn't really know about this industry and how it would work, and we're not smart enough to figure this stuff out. Yeah, they won't give us that information. So I've been in, like I said, I've been in contact with PHMSA, and I did get some help from Senator Warner's office for a while. He eventually dropped off of the case and told me I needed to hire a lawyer. But I had several questions. I had 8 questions that I wanted to ask about the pipes and their safety. And Dominion, after Warner wrote to PHMSA and PHMSA talked to Dominion, Dominion answered each one of them with vague and evasive answers. They only answered one of them completely. So I got back to PHMSA after that and I said, you know, they didn't really answer your questions. And PHMSA said, I know they didn't. And I said, well, don't you think they were vague and evasive? And PHMSA said, yes. And I said, tell them they got to give you the right answer. PHMSA says, we can't do that. We cannot ask for further clarification under our regulations. So that floored me as well. So I have gotten some communications from PHMSA too, and unfortunately I got it from higher up in PHMSA, and a lot of it was incorrect. At one point they said that the backfilling of the pipes for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline shows that it's all being done correctly. None of the pipes had been put in the ground at that point. They said that the State Corporation Commission was out with them at a pipe storage yard, and everything was okay with the pipes. And I talked to the State Corporation Commission. We've never been to any of the pipe storage yards. Oh, by the way, the State Corporation Commission will not divulge anything to me anymore. After an initial conversation where they said, let's talk at 11:30 on this particular day, and we can talk for a half an hour, any information you want. I said, great, sounds good. At about 8:30 that morning, they called me and said, you're going to have to get all the information from PHMSA. We can't talk to you anymore. So I got absolutely nothing from the State Corporation Commission. So I got a little help from Senator Warner, and then he dropped off of it and advised that I hire a lawyer. So we do have a photograph of a pipe for the MVP that shows a gaping hole about 2 inches by 2 inches all the way down to bare metal, and that metal's rusting. The pipeline company looks like they've circled that with a big line coming down, the arrow pointing toward it. So it sounds like they're going to try to repair it. But I have to wonder, if you got a hole in a pipe and you try to repair something like that, isn't that always going to be a weak spot? And all these repairs and additional coating is going to be applied out in the field on mountain slopes of 60% at the end of a 10-hour workday for some guy in the middle of the winter. I just don't trust that. You may know that 2 pipelines have exploded within the last 10 months nearby states as a result of landslides as well. So I don't think that had anything to do with the coating. But I do have some third-party information from a pipeline worker, and I'm not going to name the worker and I'm not going to name the pipeline. But this was from a pipeline that exploded somewhere in our country. I can tell you that much. So the worker says that the area where the pipeline exploded because of the landslide, during their engineer early on said, we can't put the pipeline here. There's not enough bedrock to make a stable pipeline. They went ahead and did it anyway. They put the pipe into service, carrying natural gas. That area started to slide. So the pipeline company said, we're going to send some workers out to fix it. Then they changed their mind, said, no, it's not safe enough. We can't do that. Then about a week later, they said, yeah, we will send the workers out there to fix it. So the workers were scheduled to get there at 6:30 in the morning. The pipe blew at 4:30 in the morning. So even though this pipeline company knew that the land was sliding around their pipe and needed to be repaired, they kept pumping gas through it anyway. So yeah, I'm worried about our public safety as a result of this. So let me switch to something else. The potential, yes, Doug?
I thought I'd mention, if anybody doesn't know, Friends of Nelson commissioned a study by soil scientists of the pipeline route,
Right.
steep slopes. And the big conclusion was you can't build it without a good chance of slippage and problems, serious problems.
You bet. Now, I had heard that there's already been a landslide caused by the initial stages of the ACP up in West Virginia, but I was wrong on that. There have been 7 landslides already in about the first 40 miles. So it's a concern, to say the least. So let me switch over to the public health worries about this fusion bonded epoxy coating. And I should say that I've been working with Dr. Tina Smooth, who lives down near Roanoke and has been involved in the Mountain Valley pipeline. So the material safety data sheet, and that's a document that's required on a lot of different chemicals. It shows that they have toxic properties or what their makeup is. The material data safety sheet for this 3M Scotch Coat Fusion Bonded Epoxy 6233 lists carcinogenic, mutagenic, and toxic ingredients. It also lists negative health impacts, including respiratory, reproductive, and developmental impairment. So since this material is chalking off the pipes, dusting off the pipes, it's getting out into our environment. People who live near these pipe storage yards are probably inhaling it if they're downwind from it. Wherever a pipe is laying on the ground, people nearby are probably inhaling some of this. And where these pipes are in the ground and the material has dusted off and fallen into the ground, it's probably getting into the groundwater as well. And particularly folks in karst areas where there's a rapid movement of groundwater to our wells and our springs, people in those areas, particularly along the MVP where you already have images of pipes sitting in groundwater, they're probably drinking it at this point as well. So it's a big concern. Now, the MSDS, this sheet, only applies to the original powdery formulation of this. I don't know if it applies once the material is heated and placed on the pipes and hardens up. And nobody's been able to tell me that. I've talked to a lot of experts on this, and I just can't get that information.
Bill?
Yes.
Would you comment on the latest letter you received from the Virginia Department of Health?
Yeah, I can get into that here in a moment. I'm just about to that point, but that's kind of interesting. I have been trying to work with the Virginia Department of Health, and it hasn't been too helpful at this point. But I can tell you that no expert has told me that this material is a health risks our health. Yes, sir.
As far as that, you think that stuff could be getting into the wells or water? Is there anybody looking into getting that tested, or?
I've asked the Virginia Department of Health to do that, and they said they won't do it. They said I can do it if I want to. They also told me that people really don't know this, but well owners and people who get water out of springs, they're responsible for their own water. It's like putting the onus on us. So none of the experts has told me that this material actually is negatively impacting public health. On the other hand, none of them has said that it's safe.
Yeah.
So I've contacted NIH, OSHA, NIOSH, the National Sanitation Foundation, EPA, various pipeline coating experts, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Virginia Department of Health, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and others. Nobody's given us the information that we need. So last summer, I did write a letter to the Virginia Department of Health explaining our concerns, asked them to stop all pipe placement into the ground until the health risk is fully assessed. Asked them to prevent any chalking material from getting out into our environment. Asked them to sample for this material, particularly in karst areas along the MVP. And I asked them to require treatment or replacement of pipe if this coating material is found to be a public health risk, and clean up of any spilled fusion bonded epoxy that's on the ground. So I didn't get a response very quickly, but I did get a call from a VDH fellow, Lance Gregory, Director of On-Site Sewerage and Water Surface. He said, we're looking into it. Can I have your research information, which I sent him. And I asked him to contact 3M, the pipeline companies, and FERC. But I didn't get any written response until December. And I got the response from Dr. Parham Jaburi with the Virginia Department of Health saying, we're looking into it. We can't really do anything since this is a federal project. Keep up with your research, Mr. Limpert. Test your own water, Mr. Limpert, because we won't do any sampling. And again, citizens are responsible for their own water. And anyway, there's a pipeline company's water pollution complaint resolution procedures that you should go through if your water's been polluted. And I've looked at those complaint procedures, and there's no way that a citizen can be adequately compensated for their loss of drinking water under these procedures. So Dr. Smooth and I got pretty angry at this point. And we wrote a letter back to the Virginia Department of Health in December saying, you need to request that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, act to keep these chalking materials from escaping. We said you need to rescind the water quality certification for the ACP and the MVP. You need to consult with experts. You need to conduct the sampling. Your complaint resolution procedures stink, although we didn't use that word. And we brought up the fact that 15 public officials in Flint, Michigan have already been indicted on criminal charges because of their involvement in that debacle, and the same thing could happen in Virginia. So we got an email back from Dr. Oliver of the health department saying, we talked to FERC, or we'll try to do better on this, we'll get back to you here in a couple of weeks. We sent a letter to FERC saying stop work, stop the chalking, clean it up, sample. Of course, FERC never responds, so we didn't hear anything back from FERC. But we CC'd the health department on that, and David Paler of the Department of Environmental Quality. Oh, and we got an email saying, oh, we saw what you sent to FERC, we'll get back to you here real soon. And we still haven't heard back from them, but a friend of ours said, oh, by the way, the VDH and the Department of Environmental Protection sent a letter to FERC asking FERC certain things. And so they did ask FERC. They said, we contacted 3M, EPA, the National Sanitation Foundation, and none of them have shared any risk to public health from FBE. Of course, they didn't say they said it was safe either. It said constituents believe there are health impacts. We didn't really say that. We said there could be. We're worried about that. They did cite a passage from the environmental impact statement for the MVP saying the pipeline coating would not release dangerous chemicals into the ground. They said there's been considerable regulatory experience with this material. Well, I sure haven't seen it. They also said that they've identified 5 degradation projects listed in the literature from photo degradation of epoxy resins such as this: benzene, styrene, benzophenone, benzoic acid, and benzaldehyde, whatever that is. So it seems to me like the Virginia Department of Health and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality admit that benzene, a carcinogen, could be released into our environment from this product. So that's another reason why they need to rescind the water quality certification for these projects. Not only are the plans bad for erosion and sediment control, but they've now admitted that, well, we could be releasing benzene into the environment here. So that's about as far as we've gotten at this point. Dr. Smooth and I are prepared to send another letter to the Virginia Department of Health and to David Paler, and also another letter to FERC at this point. Another concern I just came up with is that looking at the pipe safety issues regarding backfilling of the pipe, there's concerns that in rocky areas like this, there's not enough soil to go around the pipe and fill the trench. So they're going to have to use rock to fill the trench. And the PHMSA regulation says, well, yeah, they can use rock, but it's got to be rock that'll pass through a 2-inch sieve. So it's nothing like soil. It could be a rock this big. And when you have 6 to 7 feet of soil and other rock on top of the pipe, if you got a 2-inch rock hitting that pipe on a 60% slope coming down these mountains like this, that rock there's a tendency for that rock to cut through this fusion bonded epoxy, the exterior coating. It's even a tendency for that rock to slide down the side of that coating as far as I'm concerned. But that's the regulation that we've got. So in some cases, for the ACP, they may put foam padding over top of the pipe to prevent the pipe from being touched and damaged by these rocks. So we don't know what, it's unspecified. That also could have toxic properties. We just don't know. So I'll talk a little about geohazards. I know I'm talking a lot here, so I'll try to get through this a little quickly. And I got concerned about geohazards, which would be mostly landslides, also flooding, also karst areas that could create voids under the pipe and cause the pipe to collapse. But I mostly became concerned about that because in Little Valley, where we live, just less than 4 years ago, there were a number of large landslides from a 4-inch rainfall. The biggest, 500 feet long, 35 feet wide, up to 7 feet deep, and several others, all within several hundred feet of where they want to put the pipeline. So we thought, when we realized that these landslides had occurred, we thought, there's no way they're going to put the pipeline here. Oh yeah, they're going to put them there. Surveyors for the ACP were due to come out to our property in May of 2017 to look at our Miracle Ridge, which is super steep, up to 58% slope, 1,000 feet at 46% slope, a side slope of 78% on one side. So they were going to come out and look at that because they had spotted that on their desktop surveillance, looking at their computers like, well, this might be a problem. And maybe that big landslide up on the side of the mountain, little mountain right across from our property, maybe that's a problem as well. So they were supposed to come out May 30th of 2017, and they didn't show up. Other surveyors came, but the geohazard surveyor didn't come, and they said he'll probably come in a couple of weeks. Okay, we'll have to arrange to meet him. Then about a week later, they called and said, well, we don't think we need to make a geohazard survey on your property. And we said, oh yeah, we think you do, because it's really steep. They said, well, we're not going to do it. We said, well, you better do it. And, you know, we went back and forth that way. At that point, they didn't come back out. That September, we saw that they had filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that the big landslide across from us, 500 feet by 35 feet by 7 feet, was not a significant hazard. It was a low hazard, they said, because it was far removed from the pipeline and because it was on a much steeper slope. So we've been all over that landslide at the risk to our own personal health. It's 250 feet below the top of the ridge where they would be blasting that ridge down to put the pipeline in. And then the pipeline would take a 90-degree angle and come down within, again, 250 feet of the landslide on a 60% slope. So we measured the slope of where the pipeline's supposed to go at 60%, the slope of the landslide at 62%. So it's not much steeper, it's almost the same. It's not far removed. It's 250 feet below the crest where they're going to be blasting. It's 250 feet over here from where they're going to be blasting as well to put the pipeline in. So the geohazard engineer finally agreed to come out to our property last December, and we showed him our Miracle Ridge, and this is not a problem. So I said, well, you know, if you have to, you're going to have to blast here because bedrock is only about a foot below the surface. You have to do a lot of blasting, and we're afraid that 78% side slope, which there's no way you can walk up a slope like that. You could barely crawl up a slope like that. We said, we think that's going to collapse. We think the only thing that's holding that together is the big trees and all their intertwining roots. It's the steepest slope I've ever seen that's not pure bedrock. I'm shocked that it's still there. So I asked him about that, and he said, well, you know, if we blast here, it depends on how moist the soil is, whether or not that slope will collapse. That was his explanation. So I said, well, when you were up and inspected that large landslide, how did you say it was on a much steeper slope and far away from the pipeline? Well, I should explain, Mr. Limpert, that I never really inspected that landslide. I was nearby, but I didn't look at it. And I'm shocked, and I'm saying, well, why don't we walk up the mountain and look at it together? Okay, I really shouldn't be doing this, but, and he was a nice guy. He really was. And I enjoyed talking to him on other issues. But so we went up there, and we went up to the very top of the slide. We're looking down at the slide, and he says, well, this doesn't look too bad. And I said, well, you can't see the whole thing from here. We can go to the midpoint and the low point. Oh, we don't need to do that. Up at the top, he measured, it's like 3 or 4 feet that it slid away. And it should be shallower down below because this material would have gotten down below. And I'm saying, well, we think it was at least 7 feet deep down below. Oh, I don't need to look at it, the whole thing. And I said, well, I've got a tape here. Let's measure how far to where the pipeline's supposed to be. Oh, we don't need to do that. We can, how about we just say it's 250 or 300 feet? I'm saying, okay, if you don't really want to measure that, we don't have to do that. And he didn't bring his inclinometer, which is a device to measure slope. So he put his smartphone on the ground and said, well, I think it's this steep. So he called it a minor superficial slip. He didn't call it a landslide. And he also said that all what you're calling landslides here in Little Valley, I'm calling minor superficial slips. And we're seeing a lot of minor superficial slips in Western Virginia and West Virginia. So as far as I'm concerned, he's minimizing the landslide risk to these
to these projects. So I got to looking at the environmental impact statement for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and they show that a number of cooperating agencies went into writing the environmental impact statement, and I'm thinking, well, I want to see the U.S. Geologic Survey landslide experts being involved in this. No, they weren't. FERC allowed the ACP to hire their own consultant to make a geological assessment of the hazards from landslides rather than use our independent expert U.S. Geological Survey. FERC also ignored other studies, as they have here in your landslide study in Nelson County, other experts who've talked about the extreme risk of putting these large gas pipelines through terrain like this. So that's about all I have at this point. I would look for any suggestions that folks have for how I can further research this, and I'm going to stay on it. I think it's a big issue. One thing I thought about was additional letters to FERC and PHMSA and to elected officials, pressure in the Virginia Department of Health and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality to act by rescinding the water quality certificate, by sampling or by requiring cleanup, and advising them to do further research. I also want to emphasize what we had said before about Dominion's attempts to change the law so they don't have to, so they can cross at Reed's Gap, which is found illegal by the Fourth Circuit Court. They're still lobbying our elected officials. So a letter or a phone call to your federal elected official, Kane and Warner, or whoever your representative is in the House of Representatives would be a real good idea now. I attended a meeting where Greg Bupert of Southern Environmental Law Center was there, and I've never seen Greg so adamant as to, let's do this. This is really important to do this now. So a letter to those officials telling them, don't change the law for Dominion here, make them follow the law the same as the rest of us. So any questions on this stuff?
Another subject kind of, I've come up here from Durham, West Carolina.
Yes.
Did you all hear about the
Sure did.
catastrophe that happened with the gas? With their, I guess it came from Dominion. And one big old building, historic building was destroyed and several others were damaged.
You bet.
The person died, 25 in the hospital. It was a pretty bad calamity. And it took Dominion more than an hour and a half to respond to the emergency.
It's a dangerous substance. It's a bomb. It would be a 600-mile bomb underground. The MVP would be the same thing. And I've heard a couple of moms and dads saying, I'm really worried about putting my kids to sleep at night if that bomb's going to be in our backyard there. How am I supposed to do that? So they need to get a better handle on it. I'm really concerned about it. Once again, I don't have any proof that we have toxicity here or that the pipeline coating's too thin, but I'm really worried about it. And I think all of us should be. So thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks a lot.
You bet.
All right.